The Middle East is once again at a knife's edge. On September 7th, former US President Donald Trump stunned reporters when he declared that Israel had accepted his ceasefire terms for Gaza and that Hamas had just received his last warning. In Trump's words, "This is it. There will not be another one." He added that a deal to end the war and free hostages could come very soon. But Hamas's reply has only deepened the controversy. The group announced it is ready to resume negotiations, but insisted on two non-negotiable conditions: a formal declaration ending the war and a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Only then, Hamas says, will it agree to release all hostages. This hard line sets the stage for one of the most high-stakes confrontations in years, a standoff that blends diplomacy, battlefield threats and political theatre, with millions of lives hanging in the balance. The Gaza war has raged for nearly a year, born out of Hamas's October 2023 assault on Israel and the devastating Israeli campaign that followed. Several rounds of internationally brokered negotiations in Doha, Cairo and Washington have collapsed. Mediators from the United States, Qatar and Egypt have repeatedly attempted to bridge the divide between Hamas and Israel, with only short-lived humanitarian pauses to show for it. Now, Trump's re-emergence as a central figure in this crisis is extraordinary. He's not president, but as the presumptive Republican nominee and someone who touts his personal ties to Israeli and Arab leaders, Trump has inserted himself directly into the talks. Standing on a tarmac and later on board a plane, he announced his last warning to Hamas, signaling that if they reject the deal on the table, there will be no second chance. Israel, for its part, has welcomed Trump's involvement. Foreign Minister Gideon Saar confirmed that Israel had accepted Trump's proposal, calling it a potential breakthrough. Hamas, however, isn't ready to surrender. According to Trump, the proposal is straightforward. Hamas would release all 48 remaining hostages, alive and deceased, on the first day of a truce. In return, Israel would release thousands of Palestinian prisoners, including many held without charge. During the truce, negotiations would continue toward a permanent ceasefire and reconstruction plan for Gaza. Trump framed this as a win-win: a humanitarian release of hostages, relief for Palestinians, and a path to ending the war. He even suggested that the timing was urgent, saying, "It could be tomorrow, it could be this week, it could be very soon. The optics are notable." By announcing Israel's acceptance before Hamas's response, Trump tried to isolate Hamas diplomatically. The message: Israel has agreed, now the world is waiting on Hamas. But here lies the problem. Hamas says it will not hand over hostages until Israel first ends the war and withdraws from Gaza completely. Hamas spokespersons confirmed they had received US ideas via mediators and are ready to talk immediately, but their conditions remain clear and uncompromising. Formal end to the war. Hamas wants Israel, the United States and mediators to declare that hostilities are permanently over. Temporary pauses, like those seen in late 2023, are no longer acceptable. Full Israeli withdrawal. Hamas demands that Israeli troops leave all parts of Gaza. Since the ground campaign began, Israel has maintained military zones inside Gaza and effectively carved the strip into sectors under its control. Hamas insists that until these forces depart, it will not agree to release the hostages. Interim Palestinian administration, Hamas has floated the idea of allowing independent Palestinian figures, technocrats not tied to Hamas or Fatah, to oversee post-war Gaza governance. This is designed to counter Israeli and US fears of Hamas re-entrenching itself while also blocking the Palestinian Authority from stepping in unchecked. No disarmament. Senior Hamas official Bassem Naim was explicit. Hamas will not surrender its weapons as part of this deal. The group sees disarmament as a red line. This stance sets up a clash. Israel insists that any ceasefire must involve Hamas's effective surrender or disarmament. Hamas says the opposite, that disarmament is off the table and that Israel must leave Gaza first. So we now have Trump's last warning, Israel saying yes and Hamas saying not so fast. The details of Trump's proposal are still murky, but the public positions are crystal clear and they are worlds apart. Although Trump's announcement has generated headlines, much of the proposed deal's detail comes from media leaks and mediator briefings rather than official texts. Here's what is believed to be under discussion. Day one exchange. Hamas would release all 48 hostages, both living captives and the bodies of those killed, on the first day of a truce. Prisoner release. In return, Israel would release thousands of Palestinian detainees, including women, children, and possibly some high-profile prisoners long demanded by Hamas. Phased negotiations. During the truce, further talks would continue in Doha and Cairo to negotiate Gaza's future governance and the terms of a permanent ceasefire. Reconstruction talks. International donors, including Qatar, the US, and possibly Gulf states, would begin coordinating on humanitarian aid and rebuilding efforts for Gaza's devastated infrastructure. The structure is deliberately front-loaded with humanitarian gestures designed to build trust before moving on to harder political issues. However, it is also risky. If either side reneges after the first phase, the entire framework could collapse. Trump has pitched this as the deal of a lifetime, a headline-grabbing solution that ends the war and frees captives in one stroke. But skeptics note that similar frameworks have been attempted before, only to collapse over sequencing and mutual distrust. Israel's public response has been both conciliatory and aggressive. On one hand, Foreign Minister Gideon Saar confirmed Israel's acceptance of Trump's plan, stressing that Israel is prepared to make difficult concessions if it leads to the hostages' release. On the other hand, Israel's military has issued some of its harshest threats in months. Defense officials vowed to unleash a mighty hurricane of strikes on Gaza if Hamas rejects the deal. The phrase has dominated Israeli media, signaling the government's readiness to escalate the war dramatically if talks fail. This dual-track strategy, saying yes to negotiations while preparing for heavy bombardment, reflects both domestic politics and military logic. Inside Israel, public pressure to bring home hostages is immense. Families of captives have staged near-daily protests, demanding the government prioritize a deal over military operations. At the same time, hardline factions within the war cabinet insist that Hamas must be crushed militarily and stripped of its weapons. By accepting Trump's terms publicly, Israel can show flexibility. By threatening overwhelming force, it reassures hardliners that surrender remains the goal. This balancing act underscores how fragile the negotiations are. Israel's yes may not mean unconditional acceptance. It may mean conditional approval, dependent on Hamas's response. The gap between the two sides is wide. At least three sticking points stand out. Number one is sequencing. Israel insists that hostages must be released immediately, with political talks to follow. Hamas insists that Israel must first declare an end to the war and withdraw from Gaza. This sequencing battle is the single biggest obstacle. Second is disarmament versus survival. Israel's war goal remains Hamas's defeat. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly said Hamas cannot be allowed to rearm or govern Gaza again. Hamas, meanwhile, has publicly ruled out disarmament. This creates a fundamental contradiction. Israel wants to end Hamas as a military force, while Hamas wants to survive and maintain its weapons. Third is the future governance. Even if a truce begins, who governs Gaza afterward remains unsettled. Hamas has suggested independent Palestinian figures could administer the Strip. Israel has not endorsed this, while Washington and Ramallah quietly push for the Palestinian Authority to take some role. Without consensus, any temporary arrangement may quickly unravel. Hamas agrees to release hostages under Trump's framework. Israel frees prisoners, and negotiations buy months of calm. Hamas stalls, Israel escalates strikes, and civilians in Gaza suffer further while diplomacy circles back to square one. And a worst case, a breakdown triggers Israel's promised hurricane of strikes, Hamas retaliates, and the war intensifies just as talks seemed close. Each outcome depends not only on Hamas and Israel, but also on the mediators, Washington, Doha, Cairo, and increasingly Trump himself. With such high stakes, the coming days are critical. Observers should watch four key signals. Number one is a written framework. So far, all we have are Trump's public statements and press leaks. If Washington, Qatar, or Egypt release a written draft of the proposal, it would mark a serious step forward. Second is Hamas's formal response. Hamas has said it is ready to discuss, but has not formally accepted or rejected Trump's terms. A written response from Hamas leadership will show whether their conditions are negotiable. Third is Israeli cabinet decisions. While Foreign Minister Saar said Israel accepted, the final word comes from Netanyahu's war cabinet. Any backtracking or added conditions would complicate matters. And the last is military activity on the ground. Israel's promise of a mighty hurricane of strikes looms over the talks. If the Air Force launches heavy bombardments in the coming days, it may signal the government has given up on negotiations. Conversely, restraint could mean diplomacy is still alive. International reactions also matter. The UN and European powers are warning against escalation. Arab states are pressuring Hamas to accept a deal, but they also demand that Gaza not remain under indefinite siege. The global response could influence Hamas's calculations. The Gaza conflict is at a crossroads. Trump's intervention has injected urgency and spectacle, but the underlying disputes remain unchanged. Hamas demands a clear end to the war and a full Israeli withdrawal before releasing hostages, while Israel wants hostages freed first and Hamas disarmed. The outcome could swing either way, toward a fragile truce that buys time for diplomacy or toward a devastating escalation if negotiations collapse. For now, the world waits as both sides weigh whether to seize Trump's last warning or risk another round of destruction.